Our story begins with a woman telling a child about a wolf revered by a village far away as it brought bountiful harvests of wheat for a long time. Though the humans who began growing their own wheat eventually stopped believing in it. This is its tale. Time ago, a traveling merchant named Kraft Lawrence visited a village named Paslow, transporting fur pelts and wheat. In Paslow, they revere the wolf god of harvest, Holo, and the harvest that year was bountiful, and they're celebrating a festival for it. There, Lawrence looks for his friend, Yare, though, due to a festival tradition. Yare was chased after cutting the last sheaf of wheat, caught, and locked in a granary for a week, to Lawrence's dismay. Later, Lawrence meets with the village's chief, who shows that, thanks to their new farming methods, bad harvests aren't a thing anymore, even if Holo is displeased, showing that business has been thriving. Afterwards, Lawrence heads off, and at night he tries resting by a river, but he suddenly spots movement in his pelts and sees a woman there. He tries waking her up, but suddenly notices she has animal ears, as she wakes up naked, with red eyes and fangs, as she lets out a loud, wolf-like howl and displaying an enormous tail. She relaxedly asks for food, but Lawrence is afraid, thinking she's a demon. But recognizing he's not from Paslow, she explains she slipped into his cart because she wanted to leave that village, and introduces herself as Holo, but Lawrence recalls that's the name of Paslow's god of harvest. Though she claims she's no god, but rather, she's referred as Wise Wolf Holo of Yoitsu, a land up north where she's from. But Lawrence demands for proof, but she refuses, not wanting to show her wolf form, and refuses going back to Paslow. Seeing this, Lawrence promises she can stay with him if she's truly Holo, figuring she'd bring fortune. So she complies, and needing either blood or wheat, she eats the latter and suddenly transforms, scaring Lawrence, though she's then suddenly gone. So later, Lawrence returns to Paslow, now wanting to spend the night there, but finds Yuri, to his surprise, who's eating Holo's offerings, thinking it'd be a waste. But Lawrence asks why is he outside the granary, being supposed to be locked there, otherwise, Holo would escape from the last harvested sheaf of wheat, but Yuri claims Holo's a lie, claiming that they'll keep having non-stop bountiful harvests from now on, so they don't need a lie like Holo anymore. Later, Lawrence goes to his room and ponders on Yuri's words, but Holo's there, to his shock, explaining she lives in the wheat, and during the harvest, she's in the last sheaf of wheat, which makes it difficult to escape. But that, thanks to the large amount of wheat in his cart, she managed to escape at last. Though, she now is asked if he's afraid, and he claims he was, thinking that's why she disappeared back then. As she explains, humans show fear of her wolf form, but very few react otherwise, like someone from this village who asked her to ensure harvest here hundreds of years ago. She kept the promise, but also had to create bad harvests to not damage the land sometimes, which has made many villagers think poor of her. But being sure they'll have bountiful harvests in the future now, she claims they don't need her anymore. But Lawrence is curious if she wants to go somewhere now, so she claims she wants to return to Yoitsu. The next day, Lawrence sneaks Holo outside Paslow, though gets mad, seeing she's now wearing his clothes. Though, she now asks to travel with him, which he accepts thinking it's fate. As Lawrence and Holo wake up, she talks about her attributes, having pride in her tail, having a perfect sense of smell, and being able to catch lies with her ears and hear upcoming disasters, like the upcoming storm. So later, they take shelter in an inn, hiding her wolf attributes, though in their room, he tries to not see her naked. But talking about the wheat she escaped to, she explains it'll never go bad as long as she lives, but that she might disappear if it's eaten, burned, or ground down, though threshing and storing it is fine, so Lawrence decides he'll save the grains in a bag. Afterwards, they go to the common room as Holo explains she knows how to take care of herself, having traveled in this human form time ago already, and there Lawrence talks about his merchant deals with a couple. But after that, he's approached by someone who heard him, introducing himself as Zarin, a rookie merchant. Afterwards, they head back to their room, where Lawrence hands Holo a makeshift necklace that holds wheat grains in a bag, which will ensure she won't disappear. Though she only focuses on the food, though Lawrence remarks she'll have to pay everything back to him eventually. But afterwards, he asks about her lie-catching abilities, wanting to know if what Zarin said is true, recalling that he said a circulated silver coin would be replaced with one that contains more silver, making them more valuable, so the plan is to collect plenty of the old ones and exchange them for the new ones. So Sharon offers to say which coin it is, and in exchange, he asks for a share of Lawrence's profit. Holo believes he's lying, but is not sure about which part, though Lawrence doesn't know why he'd lie about such thing. So Holo claims when one lies, the lie's reason is more important than the lie itself. But now, she asks would he have done if she wasn't here, so Lawrence says he'd still act interested, as if it were true, he'd make profit, and if false, it could mean someone's plotting a money-making scheme. But Holo asks what about now, knowing it's a lie, which makes Lawrence realize he'd do the same. The next day, he wakes up, though finds Holo not there. Though later he spots her coming out of a church as she explains she was interested in listening to their preaching, recalling how the church wasn't as important when she first arrived from the north and how their stories about their God got wackier since then. Though gets sad, figuring this is a sign of changing times, but Lawrence cheers her up by saying her hometown surely hasn't changed like her. Afterwards, they meet with Sharon and Lawrence accepts his deal, but that they'll meet in the port of Passio to draw up a contract, instructing him to find him at a bar there. And on the way, Holo and Lawrence talk about her knowledge being hundreds of years old, though he jokes with her being too old she's breaking down. But she then suddenly talks about wolf attacking humans, saying they wish to eat their heads and gain their power, to Lawrence's shock. As she then asks if he's been attacked by wolves before, which he claims he has multiple times, but asks her to stop, remembering how a friend was eaten by them, as she apologizes. As he later asks her to never joke about that again while she looks sad. But later, she explains, unlike dogs, humans have always only hunted wolves, so they're a source of fear for them, and think on how to best them when they enter their forests. But this makes Lawrence asks if she's also killed humans. But she, saddened, refuses to answer that, as Lawrence apologizes. Though she was merely getting back at Lawrence, claiming now they're even, to Lawrence's frustration. Though later, she claims they have lived in completely different worlds. Lawrence and Holo arrive at Passio, though Lawrence warns her to hide her face, since people from Paslo might be here and might recognize her, having heard from her an old legend that describes her human features to a T, but she claims they wouldn't, having forgotten about her already. In Passio, Holo is heavily interested in apples, so Lawrence hands her a trenny silver coin to buy as many as she likes, but she spends it all on them. Afterwards, they rest in a room, and later, they head to sell his furs at a trading company named Malone, but also because, being a large company, he wants to investigate Sharon's information. There, he sees it's crowded as people are preparing for their grand expedition to the north, and afterwards, he approaches a representative to sell who offers 132 trennis, though Lawrence, by negotiating, manages to rise it to 140. But about to accept, Holo stops him and compliments the representative for his cleverness in having noticed as Lawrence catches on and she has the representative smell the furs, which smell of fruits, as Holo says it's thanks to the animals having eaten plenty of fruits in a forest, and points out the pelts are remarkably resilient, saying these would be highly cotizable items in the market, which makes him offer 200 trennis now. But Holo, threatening to sell somewhere else, asks for 210, which the representative, desperate, accepts. And later, Holo and Lawrence are at a bar, having given Holo a share of the first profits, though Lawrence is surprised of her merchant-like abilities, though she claims she just copied a sharp-witted merchant from time ago. But Lawrence then mentions he never picked up the scent of fruit, as Holo claims that's from the apples from before, to his shock, as she says it was merely a trick. Though she then asks about Sharon's information, but Lawrence claims Malone knew nothing of it, but he'll try to profit off of Sharon anyways. As later they meet, but Lawrence asks about how he knows, and Sharon explains it's a guess from some information he gained, but that it's dependable information, which Lawrence understands, as Sharon now asks for 10 trennis, which would be returned, and 10% of his profits for the information, which Lawrence, seeing Holo smile, accepts. So the next day, they sign the contract and reveal the affected coin will be the trenny. As later, Lawrence explains to Holo that different kingdoms will have rivaling coins with differing values, so to compete, a kingdom will increase their coin's silver to make theirs more valuable, which means Sharon might not be lying like she thought. But she claims her ears aren't perfect after all. Afterwards, they go meet an acquaintance of Lawrence, a currency dealer named Waze, because they figure the kingdoms released a small batch of the new coins already, so they could monitor the market's initial reaction. Though there, Wise tries to flirt with Holo, but Lawrence suddenly stops him, asking to show him newly minted trenny coins, which he does, but he claims they're the same still. Though then, Holo asks to see them, as she then shakes them in her hands against her ears. Though Wise claims that's useless, Lawrence notices her ears move as Holo tells Wise she couldn't hear anything. So later, Lawrence points out he noticed her ears move and is surprised she didn't say anything, but she claims it was her way to thank him, as she noticed he was jealous earlier, though Lawrence tries to remain unbothered. Though, he then asks about the coins, and she says the newer coins sound duller, to Lawrence's shock, meaning the purity's decreasing instead. So later, he's confused as to how Jaren would profit, but Holo explains Jaren might have just tricked him, as Jaren would lose nothing in the end, but points out that the timing of Jaren's coin information and finding out the coin's purities decreasing might not be a coincidence. So he changed his perspective, as Jaren might not be the mastermind, but rather a pawn. But then, Lawrence suddenly realizes how one can make money with a coin's purity decreasing, so he says to go to the Mylone Trading Company. Lawrence and Holo meet with Jaren again, though Holo sees someone's watching them. Later, Lawrence reports the scheme to Mylone and have deduced a mastermind planned on making everyone find and buy the new Trennis by spreading a rumor and then buy them from the desperate tricked people, making a profit from their loss. Afterwards, they rest in a room, but Holo suddenly remembers she had to tell Lawrence something important, but can't remember what it was, but Lawrence figures she'll remember eventually as she falls asleep. The next day, they meet with Pazios Mylone's branch manager, Richton Marlheit, who's found out another company named Medio Trading is behind Jaren's scheme, but that there's someone yet to be identified behind them. But Richton's accepting Lawrence's deal as they plan on meddle with Medio's scheme and profit off of it. And him having provided the information will get 5% of the profits, which Lawrence calculates will be around 2,000 Trennis, being euphoric about it, saying he could open up a store with that. Afterwards at night, back in their room, Lawrence draws a sketch of his future store, which Holo notices as he says this is his deal store, planning to open it in an ideal town, which would allow him to forge close friendships and have an easier time finding a wife. Though Holo feels troubled because that means she'd have to travel alone or would have to find a new traveling partner. But as Lawrence says her knowledge and money will help her, she gets sad, claiming she's tired of being alone. So Lawrence, seeing this, says he still wouldn't be able to own a store yet, so he doesn't mind traveling with her until she returns home, which makes Holo happy. Thought, it's quickly getting sad again. So Lawrence tries comforting her as she says she always has the same dream, with her friends Yu, Inti, Paro, and Miuri, but then wakes up completely alone, explaining she decided to travel from due to her long lifespan when she first left Yotsu, but now that she wants to see her friends again, they're nowhere to be found. Then cries on Lawrence, wishing not to wake up alone anymore. So Lawrence offers her to wipe her tears with the paper with his drawing, as he draws and throws them away all the time, and the deal isn't done yet after all. Holo, now feeling better, goes rest, though, in Lawrence's bed, wanting to rest with him. But then she remembers what she wanted to tell him, that he's interfering with a large scheme, and she's heard 3 thugs outside the room. So she instructs him to follow her, jumping out the window, and Lawrence, hearing the door being hit, forcefully follows and then runs with Holo to Mylone, but are now being chased. Though Lawrence suddenly tells Holo he'll buy her a comb for her beautiful hair, though she claims she'd rather have one for her tail. And afterwards, they're almost at Mylone, but Holo stops him as they're waiting for them. So Holo comes up with an idea. She'll distract them, while he rushes to Mylone, trying to convince him as if she's captured, he can have Mylone help rescue her by threatening to betray them. Lawrence refuses, fearing she'll be handed to the church and killed, but she hugs Lawrence, saying she believes he'll come for her, and then runs away, drawing the attention on her. So Lawrence rushes, but is then chased too, but he makes it to Mylone's gate, but is now surrounded, but he's suddenly swiftly pulled in and the pursuers, hearing a signal, fall back. Lawrence then meets with Richton, figuring he was chased by Medio's people, but talking about Holo, Richton says one of his men saw her captive. But Richton finds strange they were chased, as they can't stop their plan by taking him and Holo as hostages, and Lawrence said everything already, so what happened to them would be irrelevant. Lawrence is distraught at this, but Richton rationalizes Lawrence must have leverage against them, asking what that'd be, which makes Lawrence realize something. But then someone comes in with a letter for Lawrence, which contains Holo's hairs, and reads that they have the wolf, threatening to hand her to the church if Mylone doesn't stop. So now Lawrence chooses to reveal that Holo is an incarnation of a wolf, to Richton's shock. Holo in capture is shocked, having witnessed something. At that time, Richton realizes Holo's being threatened, but is wary of rescuing her, as if the church finds out, they take control of them, and she can't escape as she be reported anywhere she went. But thanks to investigating, they know the King of Trenny plans to melt the old coins and make lower purity ones with them due to financial constraints. So Mylone's hijacking Medio's plan, which is collect immense quantities of the old Trennis and exchange them to the king for profitable privileges. But Lawrence comes up with a plan. Finish the deal with the King of Trenny before Medio reports them and allow them to buy the privileges, saying they'd make the purchase more profitable for Medio. That way, they wouldn't report Mylone. And also they wouldn't report Holo, as the church would send Malone to the stake, and the king would be condemned for having worked with them, so he'd go after Medio. And figures Medio hasn't obtained all the coins they need yet, otherwise they'd have reported Holo to the church already. So what he'll do to stall is steal Holo back and run around until the deal is done. Richton finds this reckless, but Lawrence threatens with testifying against him and explains Holo's true strength will fend anyone off. So Richton, at this, says they can finish the deal as quick as by dawn in 2 days, to Lawrence's amazement. And thanks to their connections everywhere, they know where Holo is. So later, they set their plan in motion as Lawrence departs in a carriage, being told to follow a path underground, where if they succeed in rescuing Holo, they'll be waiting for him at the end of it, with the code word being Ra. They then reach the underground's entrance, which Lawrence enters and begins moving. And afterwards, he reaches the end and awaits. And after some time, he hears Ra, and the top opens, revealing Holo. Though, she appears unamused, and Malone wants to make this look like a robbery, so they have to carry stolen bags. Afterwards, they reach the exit and are taken to the carriage, though the guy sees Holo's wolf ears, but is just amused as he leaves the carriage and it departs. Though Holo's very pissed because Lawrence promised he'd comfort her, so she thought whoever rescued her first was him, and embarrassed herself. Though, Lawrence is just glad she's safe. But she then reveals that Yare was among those who captured her, to Lawrence's shock. As she explains, it appears he heard her name from Jaren and wanted to see if it was their harvest god, which he found out she was, though Holo, in tears, tells Lawrence that made her so happy. But Yare then said they didn't need her anymore, so they turned her to the church, which deeply hurt her. But Lawrence tries comforting her, saying she'd have left Paslo anyways, and if they hate her, she can get back at them before leaving. Saying they're merchants who don't laugh until the money comes in and don't cry until they've gone bankrupt. Saying that, they'll definitely laugh, which works in cheering her up, though she claims she's grown weak to emotion and tells him not to misunderstand, saying she would have cried regardless of him being there. But at this, Lawrence angrily claims he's just doing this for money, but sees Holo now depressed, shocking him, but she's just toying with him to his dismay. Afterwards, they arrive at their destination as Lawrence says to tell Richton that Paslo's behind Medio's scheme, and then they enter the underground where she teases him by calling herself cute, but then holds his hand and says she's glad, because he's a cute boy himself, teasing him again, though Lawrence just drags her with him. But they smile regardless and walk while holding each other's hands. Though Yurei and his people are now after them. Holo and Lawrence keep making their way, but she suddenly hears pursuers ahead of them, so they turn back. But Holo stops, hearing they've released the hounds, as she instructs Lawrence to cover his ears and lets out an incredibly loud howl, scaring the dogs off. They then keep running, though seeing the roof opening they hide, but are found still, so they run away. But they run into a pursuer, who they take down. But then, Lawrence is suddenly stabbed in the arm, but he manages to take him down regardless, so he walks with Holo again, and despite being in pain and bleeding, claims he's fine. Though he afterwards passed out and woke up next to Holo, who was worried sick for him, but she claims they must be close to an exit as she smelled light, and Lawrence notices Holo's bandage the wound and she leads him now. But it's not an exit, but rather a well above, to their shock. And the pursuers have found them. So Lawrence tries defending Holo, but Yuri stops them, surprised at seeing Lawrence, who's also surprised Yuri's involved in this, having figured out Paslo planned on blackmailing the king of Trenny for tariff exemptions on wheat trading for massive profits. Though, Yuri only can't believe Holo's his companion and wants her handed over, so they'll deliver her to the church and also crush Malone this way, and tries enticing Lawrence, promising priority for him on their wheat, which will make him obtain his desired store, saying as a merchant he can see the profit and loss of this offer, which Lawrence recognizes, but says that a good merchant must honor his contract, so he'll take Holo to her hometown. So Yuri, disappointed, instructs to kill Lawrence and capture Holo. Lawrence tries fighting, but Holo, seeing him weak, drops him to the ground and asks him to endure, sucking his blood from his wound, and then tells Lawrence not to look, as she transforms into a gigantic wolf and takes Yuri's people down one by one. And afterwards, she returns to Lawrence, where Yuri's at too. But despite Lawrence's protests, Holo bites Yuri, but only his cloak, having spared him, though she now looks at Lawrence, who's terrified of her, but then remembers when Holo first transformed, though Holo just picks her sack of wheat and chooses to leave. But Lawrence, unable to move, tries to stop her, and yells at her that he'll need compensation for the dress she destroyed, so he'll chase after her for it. And Holo stops momentarily, but then continues her way, as Lawrence, desperate, ends up passing out. Though, he then wakes up on a bed in Malone's headquarters, where Rickton says the church luckily didn't find Holo, and the public didn't see her true form. Though his people did, having received a report from his subordinates of a giant wolf that wouldn't move, protecting Lawrence. Lawrence is shocked she protected him, though Rickton says that after taking him to the headquarters, she left without saying where a day ago. But Rickton then explains the plan on his side went well, having collected 350,000 trennis in the end, to Lawrence's amazement. But he's only entitled to 120 of them, as their total profits after all the expenses were just 2,400 trennis to Rickton and Lawrence's disappointment. But that, thanks to Medio being desperate for the privilege and their reckless collecting of trennis that drop in value, they made a great deal with them, of which he's giving 1,000 trennis to Lawrence to his shock. Though he asks for the value to be given in pepper, which he plans on selling by traveling, which Rickton accepts. But then, they suddenly receive an invoice for Lawrence, where he owes 140 trennis for purchased products, but he gets shocked at this and rushes out, as the items are women's clothings and a comb, and a huge amount of apples. As outside, he finds Holo, who says she can't have him chase her all the way up north to collect a debt. As they shake hands. In a field, a shepherd, using a horn, protects her sheep from the wolves. Meanwhile, Holo and Lawrence continue their travel as they reach the town of Porosin. They get a room at an inn, and afterwards, with Holo sporting a new look, they head to the Lapparan Trading Company to sell the pepper, and after this, they'll head to the city of Reuvenhagen. Afterwards, they meet with Lapparan's representative, though he talks about a sorcerer found a few days ago who could control wolves near Reuvenhagen, but the benevolent church forgave them. But Lawrence is just there to do business as the representative brings out a balance. Though Holo tells Lawrence she's thirsty, which reminds him of her trick at Malone, so she's given a jar of water. As then, they weigh the pepper and offers 1 lumion gold coin for each weight of pepper, equal to roughly 33 trennis. Lawrence accepts, but before shaking his hand, Holo gets in the way and claims she's dizzy, saying her vision's tilted one way, and drops the water on the table, which pours to the other end, as the table was tilted, which messed with the balance in the representative's favor. Lawrence, seeing this, promises to overlook it, in return of getting proper payment for the pepper, and allowing him to buy twice their worth on credit, on high-grade armor as the Grand Northern Expedition's about to begin, so he'll sell it to a company with good relationships with Lapparan, so the credit would be paid back immediately. The representative, nervous, accepts though Holo also wants food, so the representative tells her to eat anything she wants at a store and goes get a guide for her. While Lawrence is surprised she noticed his trick, and she claims she noticed the moment they entered the room. Holo then heads with the guide, while Lawrence stays doing business, and at noon, Lawrence is finally finished, though outside, he hears a man talk about a tale of a town up north that worshipped a pagan woven god. Later, they're back in their room, where Holo's taken tons of the store's food there, and the next day, they continue their journey. Lawrence, meanwhile, explains the Grand Northern Expedition is an expedition to hunt down heretics and talk about other trading goods, saying bringing spices to Reuvenhagen would have been a loss due to tariffs, but Holo asks about gold, so Lawrence explains they charge enormous tariffs for it, but the exception is those who have connections with the church, who on top of paying way less tariffs, the church brands their gold with their seal, making it extremely profitable. As Holo understands, the church is monopolizing the gold profits, but she mentions what about smuggling it, but Lawrence says if caught, they chop off their dominant arm. Though then, they run into tons of people ahead, and they find out mercenary troops are moving south on the road ahead of them. And there is a detour, but it's filled with wolves on top of rumors of a pagan sorcerer there. Holo, not wanting to deal with mercenaries, decides they head through the detour as she'll just command the wolves off. Though on the way there, Holo detects a type of human she hates. A shepherd, which Lawrence figures must be the sorcerer, which he approaches and finds out it's a young woman. Having figured the shepherd's not a sorcerer, Lawrence asks to pray for their journey's safety, which the shepherd does and is rewarded with a coin, which she's surprised at. But she suddenly asks if they're going to Reuvenhagen, why are they taking this path filled with wolves, as Lawrence says they're pressed for time. But at this, the shepherd shyly asks if they'd like to hire her, as she could keep wolves at bay during their journey, displaying her skills with her dog. At this, Lawrence goes to Holo and asks what she thinks of her skills, But claiming he has her already, Lawrence explains the shepherd could lead to new business opportunities. So Holo says her skills are good, especially her dog handling ones, but asks if this is a good idea as they have to travel together. But as Lawrence doesn't get what she means, multiple times she ends up teasingly saying, "I wanted the two of us to travel alone," saying this is surely what he wanted to hear, saying he's a fool. And he blushes at it, but Holo ends up agreeing to travel with them. So Lawrence then hires the shepherd, and she reveals her name's Nora Arendt and her dog's Enek. Now on the way, Lawrence asks about her life, as she explains she used to live in a shelter for the poor, but one day she found Enek, and he's the reason she became a shepherd 4 years ago, having also always wanted to have a job of her own. Though Lawrence then mentions it's odd for a shepherd to offer guard someone, so Nora explains she wanted someone to talk to. And she wants to become a tailor, so she needs money to join the association, but she can only offer guards in a dangerous area like this as the safer ones are already taken. Afterwards, it's noon, so Nora has to rest, needing to be awake at night to watch over the sheep, so they set up camp. Though then, Lawrence asks why doesn't she change of employers, seeing she could take on bigger tasks, but her employer's the church, which she says has been considerate of her. Though Lawrence tells her he'll talk to his acquaintances in Reuvenheiger about her, as God never forbade having another job on the side, which she's thankful for. Afterwards, Nora rests, though Holo appears to be in a bad mood because she can't groom her tail in peace, and mentions his chat with Nora, but says he didn't notice she disliked speaking with him, which shocks him, but she's just teasing him again. Though he claims it's fine, saying if he was loved at first sight, he'd miss the pleasure of experiencing someone's affection grow. Though, calls this his smooth talk. But Holo just bursts in laughter at that, to his dismay. Though after that, he just claims he's happy her bad mood's gone. The next day, they finally arrive at Reuvenheigen and Lawrence pays Nora with an extra for potential wool investment in the future. Though asking about her routes, she mentions an incredibly dangerous shortcut through a forest that leads to the pagan town of Lantra, surprising Lawrence. Afterwards, they go their own ways, and Lawrence and Holo then enter the city, where they charge one set of armor as tariff, though they notice the officials look at the armors oddly. Regardless, they afterwards eat, and then head to a trading house, as Lawrence explains it's a branch of the Rowan Merchant Association, which he's part of, consisting of merchants from his homeland. While Nora arrives at her church, though Lawrence asks Holo to wait outside, and he enters, meeting with Jacob Tarantino, a very old acquaintance of his. Though meanwhile, someone visits the Remerio Trading Company, where Lawrence is supposed to trade the armor to, asking about Lawrence, who the representative has no idea of, so he's told to eventually tell Lawrence some news from Latperrin Trading. Lawrence explains he wants a certificate to show he's a member of the Rowan Association, though he then asks Jacob if anyone wants to go to Lantra, but Jacob figures he means the shepherd and is warned no one wants to get involved with her because being the only one who's able to wander around that dangerous area makes the church suspect she's a sorceress, so everyone prefers to avoid her. Though then, asking who the certificate's for, Lawrence says it's for the Remerio Trading Company, but Jacob mentions Remerio has a problem right now, which he'll find out there. Meanwhile, Nora, in the church, is asking the father if she could take the sheep to a safer area, but the father claims she'll be fine as God blessed her with this gift. While Holo and Lawrence head to Remerio, though no one's outside, but Holo can hear people inside, saying the atmosphere appears unpleasant. They then enter and meet the representative, who finds out he's Lawrence, but they know they came to sell armor, because a Latperrin representative came yesterday and transferred Lawrence's debt to Remerio. Because the Grand Northern Expedition's been cancelled, so the price of armor has become worthless, which Latperrin knew, which means Lawrence got tricked, and now he's gone bankrupt to Holo and Lawrence's shock. Lawrence then meets with the head of Remerio, who says he'll have 2 days to pay 46 Lumion gold coins, which Lawrence accepts. So he then heads out, though Holo notices he appears incredibly nervous. On the way, he claims he can't run, as there's eyes everywhere, so he's determined to get the money soon, as Holo offers her help. But as he has to go to Rowan, he asks her to wait at the inn, as if he took her there, they'd think they're a couple, but she vehemently refuses. So Lawrence comes up with saying they're just business partners. So afterwards, they meet with Jacob, who finds out Holo's incredibly skilled at trading, but now also knows Lawrence's awful situation, but the association can't do anything about it, nor members can loan each other's money, even if Jacob regrets not being able to help, and warns him that if he doesn't pay, he'd be forced to work on poor jobs for 10 years to pay his debt, but tells him to do the best he can. So then Lawrence has a plan, pay the debt with another debt. Though the first places he went to ask for loans rejected him, but he still kept optimism. but it kept fading as he kept being rejected and was even ridiculed and berated. But eventually, at a place, he was asking for a loan as well, but the person had heard of his issue already, saying he'd have liked to be of help, but seeing him walk around with a woman while depending on others' money, he finds it a mockery and slams the door on his face. So Lawrence keeps walking, but Holo worries, seeing he's pale, but he shoves her away and is angry at her, saying if it weren't for you. But he soonly realizes what he just said and apologizes. Though Holo just says she'll return to the inn, and Lawrence is left distraught. Holo sat at the inn, while Lawrence, begging for money, is angrily thrown a bag of it, with the condition he never shows his face again, but he claims he'll just borrow it, picking it from the floor. He then returns to the inn and tries apologizing to Holo, though her tail shoves him off. But he tells her he only got 6 Lumion coins so far, so he wants her to look over them, while he'll try his luck at the gambling house, his last resort. But heading out, Holo throws the bag at his head and demands him to get back in. Though there, she asks what would he have done if she ran away with his money, but he claims he collected the money with that half in mind, so she could have some traveling funds if he wasn't able to continue with her. But Holo, angry and crying, calls that idiotic and says she's the one at fault for this, as he could have borrowed money if she hadn't been with him, saying he'd be angry. But Lawrence says he was the one in the wrong, as she was just worried for him, which makes Holo angry and tries to hit him with a chair. But she instead almost ends up falling out of the window, but Lawrence manages to save her, though he sees she's very pissed. And Holo cries, saying he's too good-natured because he'd be angry at her, but he instead apologized. As Lawrence says, he thought he could never take back what he did to her earlier and really wanted to apologize over and over for that, and apologizes for his actions backfiring. But Holo asks why is he so good-natured. So he says it's probably his personality, but Holo gets mad because he's inherently good-natured and he lied. But she's mad because he didn't lie by saying his actions are a sign of his affection in an attempt to woo her like any other male would, though she knows it's because of his nature. But she asks to try again, so now he says it's because she's special to him, which makes her happy as she rests her head on him, and Lawrence hugs her as she wags her tail. Though she then laughs, saying what are they even doing, though Lawrence claims she was the one who made them do it, though she remarks next time they'd argue instead, as problems may be resolved faster that way. But that also, she has a good idea for him, which she tells, leaving him shocked. So the next day, with Holo, he meets with Romerio and offer him to smuggle gold. Romerio scoffs at this, but Lawrence explains he knows someone highly skilled, desperate for money, and frustrated with their employer, the church, who he would convince by saying it'd be an act against them, but that he'd have to provide the money for the gold's purchase. Romerio's perplexed, but Holo tells Romerio he'd make haste, hearing his workers, planning to abandon him as they speak, because the armor market crash has left Romerio in almost ruins, as Romerio falls to the floor and convinced by Lawrence, he accepts. Afterwards, Lawrence explains to Holo, Romerio used their emergency funds to provide for the gold while they wait outside the church for Nora, who then comes out and surprised seeing them, Lawrence offers her a job, which she quickly reacts interested to. So afterwards, he explains he'd pay her 20 Lumion for the job, to her shock, saying this would allow her to live as a tailor without worrying, but that it's incredibly dangerous. Though asking if she'd continue in this town, she claims she'd go to another one. As Lawrence mentions, it must be because of the church, saying they must suspect she's a sorceress due to her great shepherd skills, so they keep sending her to dangerous places where she'll eventually be killed. Which Nora saddened recognizes, as Lawrence says she can get back at them with his plan, because they'll smuggle gold, and the plan is to hide it below her sheep's bellies. But the price of gold is exorbitant anywhere close due to the church, except one place, the pagan town Lantra. So they'll also use her as cover, so no one suspects, on top of taking them through the shortest route. And it'd also be perfect to get back at the church, as their greatest sources of income include gold. Nora ponders on this, but accepts. Though at night at the inn, Lawrence worries about gambling his life and of involving Nora on this. But Holo points out Nora decided this herself, who's well aware of the risks. As Lawrence says they'll have to work hard, so they all come out laughing in the end. Lawrence and Holo, accompanied by Martin Liebert from Romerio, meet with Nora and begin their plan, where after a day of traveling, they reach the forest to Lantra and make their way through it. Afterwards at night, they set camp, still inside the forest. But then, Holo and Nora become alert as the latter blows her horn, though they appear to have driven any wolves away, as Nora mentions the wolves here rarely howl or attack, which Holo finds odd, wondering if there's something else out there. Afterwards in the day, they exit the forest and reach Lantra, where Liebert goes do the gold trading and they await for him. Though Nora eventually asks Holo if she knows about wolves, to Lawrence's shock, though it's because she noticed the wolves extremely quickly last night. Though Holo claims it was just a coincidence because she travels alone with Lawrence, so she knows of a wolf who chases a cute rabbit like her at night, which embarrasses Nora. Afterwards, by noon, Liebert returns with the gold. Lawrence proposes setting camp by the forest, but can't as Holo hears rain is coming. And afterwards, they're in the forest, but running as wolves are chasing them now, while Nora uses her skills with Enoch to protect them, and Holo fends the wolves off with her voice. Though Holo then tells Lawrence to instruct the others go ahead, and then separate from her as well, because she heard something, as an incredibly loud howl is then heard given out by a gigantic gray wolf. Though Holo recognizes it's a young, prideful one, so she'll take care of it herself, as Lawrence, reluctant, instructs Nora and Liebert to continue without them. Liebert complies, though Nora refuses, but Holo convinces her to go, saying they'll meet again. So Holo then asks Lawrence to keep her hood safe as she heads into the forest, but Lawrence tells her he'll see her again, and Holo answers with a smile, as Lawrence then goes ahead, though concerned, while Holo faces the giant wolf, reproaching his poor attitude towards his elders. Meanwhile, Lawrence is chosen to set camp ahead in the forest, waiting for Holo, but he suddenly hears horses but sees it's Remirio's people who were on standby outside the forest and heard what happened from Liebert. Though they then ask about Holo, as Lawrence saddened says she's not with him, but they then tie up Lawrence because Remirio's betraying him. But they mention they'll also kill Nora, so Lawrence tries retaliating, but he's quickly subdued. But seeing Lawrence like this, they suggest just leaving them to the wolves, as they don't really want to kill anyone, but they fear Nora will just escape due to her sorcery. So they choose to Lawrence to the wolves, and take care of Nora outside as they leave with Lawrence's horse, while Lawrence is left regretfully crying. Lawrence won't give up, so he burns his ties off with his wood fire, bearing the pain, and now rushes to find Holo, but slipping onto the ground, he hears a voice from Holo, who's alive. Surprised seeing her, he claims Remirio's betrayed them, which she notices from his bruises, but seeing his burn marks, she claims she would have gone to him soon, but pulls her cloak from his jacket, surprised at how he still took care of it. But now says that she may have to kill humans now, saying she's kept her patience for his planned success, and even kneeled against the young wolf to appease her arrogance, which she can forgive. But she calls Lawrence a fool for protecting her cloak despite his state, though a good-natured one. So, Holo now decides to go after Remirio and Reuvenhagen, but Lawrence claims they got to rescue Nora. But Holo sees a problem with that, as Nora's a shepherd, so if she sees her wolf form, she'll think she's their enemy, but Lawrence still begs her. So with the condition that she won't guarantee the Remirio's people's lives, she accepts, which Lawrence understands but still says he believes in her. So Holo then takes her clothes off, eats the grain, and takes her wolf form, instructing Lawrence to climb on her as she then races to Nora's direction, and eventually finds them howling and jumping over them, then has Lawrence get off, and she attacks Remirio's people. But Liebert then asks Nora to protect him, so with Enoch, she faces Holo, as Lawrence watches concerned, but sees Holo kick Enoch away and bites Nora. Though it was just his imagination, as Holo jumps and Nora instructs Enoch to attack. But Nora suddenly stops Enoch as Lawrence yells out a name, but Holo just jumps over her and bites Liebert instead. So Lawrence runs to Nora and explains the wolf is Holo. And afterwards, Holo shows she's not Liebert, as Lawrence retrieves the gold, as Liebert regains consciousness, and Holo stomps his leg, so he forcibly reveals Lawrence's share was too high for profit, so Remirio instructed on betraying him. But as he tries pleading, saying they're both merchants, Lawrence punches him, saying they're not the same. Lawrence tells Nora they plan to kill her too, but now, having the gold, saying it's worth 600 Lumion, he hands it to her and says they could run away with it, but he'd feel guilty if Remirio went bankrupt. But Holo shoves him at this, but Lawrence says they'd eventually return for revenge and doesn't want her to bite everyone to death. So Holo gives in and says to do as he wishes. So he asks Nora to decide what to do with the gold, surprising her, saying that if they smuggle it into Reuvenhagen, it'll be worth 6,000 Lumion instead, which could save everyone. Later, Lawrence walks alone with Holo, though she asks for the turf, as Lawrence reveals there wasn't enough gold, as there was just 100 Lumion worth of it instead. So he lied, so Nora would accept smuggling it in, because if she chose to split it, he'd have barely had enough to pay off his debt, and figures Remirio would have barely recovered with the entire gold too. So then he heads to Reuvenhagen on Holo's back as he explains saving Romerio is also to further their own profits, but that they'll also pay, asking her to leave the rest to him. So later, Holo awaits at a bar, while Lawrence has tied up Romerio and is asking him to buy the gold for 500 lumion. But refusing, Lawrence opens his secret stash, threatening to take the money Romerio was going to run with and sell the gold to someone else, and explains he wants the 500 lumion payment over 10 years, which won't hurt him, but to write it to the Rowan Merchant Association, so Romerio complies. And afterwards, Lawrence meets with Jacob again, who's extremely relieved seeing him again. And there, he offers Jacob to buy the contract with Romerio, which he accepts, paying 130 lumion upfront, which Lawrence happily accepts. Though, later with Holo, he explains after paying everything alongside their profits, it just broke even. Though, Holo has two questions, wanting to know how much he trusts Nora in smuggling in the gold, so Lawrence explains he calculated they could quickly chase her, and the second one she asked outside, asking whose name did he yell when she faced Nora, saying she couldn't hear due to her anger, so Lawrence claims he said Holo's name. Though, Holo says he's lying, which Lawrence affirms, because he can't actually remember, but that he believes he called Holo's name because it's a little shorter than Nora's. But Holo punches him, baffled at this, and is angry because he actually believes that. Though then, as Nora's arriving, Holo asks to try calling out a name now, so he tries, but the city's bells suddenly make noise, so she didn't hear. But as they see Nora arrive, Lawrence says Holo's definitely much easier to say, which makes her blush, saying he's a fool. Lawrence celebrates the mission's success with Holo and Nora, as Lawrence lively talks with Nora, though Holo looks slightly annoyed, but she then feels bad and suddenly faints to their shock. Though, Holo then dreams on how she's lived alone, peaceful, in the fields for hundreds of years, while in comparison, his current traveling days with Lawrence are filled with so many new and different things, making her feel as if born again. And though she's traveled with humans in the past already, making unforgettable memories, she right now can't get lost in them, busy wondering about what Lawrence does in his day, only having been able to recall Yoitsu with sad nostalgia when they first met, but that, with days full of excitement, she has no time to feel such sadness, and recalls she's having fun, in fact so much fun she feels uneasy. Afterwards, Holo wakes up in the inn, vaguely remembering Lawrence carrying her there, but she wonders why is she exposing her weak side, but claims this is all Lawrence's fault, as it's thanks to her they overcame this ordeal, wondering what's so good about Nora. Though then claims he'd be here taking care of her, but then hides while blushing because Lawrence is entering the room, though he's angry because she didn't tell him she was feeling bad and was worried for her. Though he's glad she's Zach, and then touches her forehead, seeing she has a fever, so he'll make her food tomorrow as she goes sleep. The next day, she wakes up, though is mad not seeing Lawrence here, but he suddenly enters with apple wine for her instead of water, though the wine's watered down for her fever, to her dismay, but he says he'll make her a porridge with important ingredients to recover from a fever, wheat grains simmered in sheep milk with slices of apples and cheese, which Holo's incredibly excited for and demands Lawrence to bring it now, so he goes make it, while Holo goes back to sleep. Though she dreams again of her birthplace in wheat fields. Though, despite claiming they're nostalgic, she also finds them repulsive, as she had to accept and fulfill her responsibilities back then, a duty no one asked to do, but one someone must do, but she eventually ended up shackled without realizing it for hundreds of years. Though now recalls she's never met someone who would smile seeing her nose twitch at the smell of food, thinking on Lawrence. As she wakes up and finds Lawrence in front of her who's brought her porridge, though she has Lawrence spoon-feed her, and afterwards she's finished the entire pot. But as Lawrence tries leaving with it, she stops him, saying the inn's too quiet. So Lawrence decides to stay, asking what she'd like to eat later, so she says she wants to eat the same porridge. But they need sheep milk for that, and it's expensive in the afternoon as it has to be fresh, so he says he'll have to ask Nora for it. But Holo gets pissed hearing her name, demanding him to buy it instead. But Lawrence asks why is she being so hostile regarding Nora, saying that even though she doesn't like shepherds, he claims she has a sweet disposition, so she can be an exception. So Holo gives in and accepts she's in the wrong, but says one can like or dislike something irrationally. So Lawrence then tries leaving with the pot, but Holo asks if he'll return, as Lawrence claims he will as the inn's quiet after all. And later at noon, he's returned. Though with Nora. But Holo actually has a question for her, asking what's the greatest secret to guiding sheep well. So Nora says, probably having a generous heart, which surprises Holo as she smiles. Though Holo claims all sheep think they're smart, while looking at Lawrence, which makes her and Nora laugh, as Lawrence also follows, all laughing together. Though now, we see the woman from the beginning of the story, having finished telling the tale of the wolf to the child. Though she claims the story doesn't end there as the child asks for more, so she continues with the next place the wolf headed to in the journey to her home. Lawrence and Holo continue with their journey as Lawrence claims she has a gift for Holo, though it's just 3 feathers, which will signal she's a nun to not get in trouble in the following towns to her anger. Though Lawrence then talks about the upcoming town, Humerson, that has a festival starting soon, to Holo's interest, but asking if wouldn't they spend too much on her snacks, Lawrence claims they have enough money for the inn. As Holo teases him, saying it'd be a shame if they ended up in a 1-bedroom, which makes Lawrence nervous. Though, he claims she isn't his type, which Holo can tell isn't a lie, but she knows her type are weak ones, teasing him, saying he'd be a knight if he wants a weak princess to his dismay. Though, she recalls he actually acted like a knight before, defending her from Paslo's villagers, being the first time someone had protected her. And as she says she hopes he keeps treasuring her, he apologizes for saying she's not his type, and Holo says she loves that side of his. Afterwards, continuing their journey, Holo spots fishing carts, so Lawrence tries buying some from them, but the fish merchant, a young man, apologizes as they're reserved already. But he finds out Lawrence is also a merchant, and finding out they're staying in Humerson, he says all the inns are sold out already, so Lawrence decides he'll ask his association for help. The Rowan Association, to the fish merchant's shock because he also is part of it, introducing himself as Fermi Amati. So Lawrence introduces himself and Holo his companion, who Amati's left amazed by her beauty. So now Amati offers Lawrence he can help in securing a room, which Lawrence happily accepts. So afterwards, Amati's gotten them a room with a nice view outside, though Lawrence has found a letter for him at the town's trading house, which Holo tries reading, but she claims she can't read. So Lawrence says it's warning him that the armor price would drop due to the northern expedition being cancelled, which arrived too late, but it's a non-issue now as they decide to go eat. Though, Amati's meanwhile walking in circles in the inn's lobby, as then he sees Holo, who says she's eager to try his food as Amati excitedly claims she'll love it. And she later devours fish, and also finds the wine similar to the one from Yotsu. But this makes Lawrence remember the man from Porosin, taking about the town that worshipped a wolf god. But Lawrence just tells her to be wary of the strong alcohol she's drinking, though she claims it's nothing for her. Though she's hungover the next day. So Lawrence heads out for a bit, meeting with a fellow merchant, Mark Cole, a flour and wheat salesman, as Lawrence tries offering selling him nails from Reuvenhagen. Mark tries buying them for 10.5 lumion, but Lawrence manages to rise it to 14 after negotiating, choosing credit instead of money. So Mark has his apprentice, Eulant, a kid, help move the goods. Afterwards at night, Lawrence is with Holo, who's drinking fine wine now, saying it doesn't cause hangovers, and that it reminds her of home. But at this, Lawrence asks her the exact location of Yotsu, but she can't remember where it is, but thinks she'll remember when they get close. But Lawrence asks if she remembers nearby towns, so Holo, after thinking, remembers one, Yohira, which Lawrence actually heard of, and Holo signals, from there, it'd take her 2 days to reach Yotsu in her wolf form, so Lawrence calculates it'd take a month in cart, and thinks on the snow that'll make it difficult to travel. So he asks if, once they reach Yohira, if she can reach Yotsu on her own after that. Holo, looking off, claims she can, but this makes Lawrence remember she's tired of being alone, so he says he'll wait for her at Yohira, but Holo doesn't want him to worry anymore, saying she forgot humans live extremely short lives compared to hers, though claims it's because it's comforting being by his side. But Lawrence notices she still appears hurt as she decides to go sleep. Lawrence dreams on Holo, abandoning him in the underground, waking up with his arms stretched out, though sees Holo still there. So he heads out and meets with Mark again, but he asks if he knows a chronicler who keeps historical records, wanting to find stories from the north, as Mark says he knows someone, but she's ostracized for being a heretic. So he'll need a middleman, instructing him to find Jaibados, who knows the chronicler, and also asks Mark to ask for information on Yohira as well, and also asks for wheat bread. Afterwards, he returns to the inn as Holo wakes up, having smelled the bread, which she cheerily eats, and then Lawrence hands her a trenny so she can explore the town, but she wants to go with him, not wanting to be alone, but he can't as he'll be extremely busy today, apologizing. She understands, but says that if she brings someone back with her, to be considerate and leave the room, which shocks Lawrence, but she just wanted to see his expression before leaving, to Lawrence's dismay. So later, he heads to find Betos, while on the way, thinks on the man's tale of Yotsu, who said that Yoitsu was annihilated by a monstrous bear, which Lawrence hopes isn't true. So at a bar, he asks for Beto's, but Amadi runs into Lawrence, so they drink as Lawrence thanks him for his help, but Amadi wants to show Lawrence around town, wanting to broaden his view from a traveling merchant. Though he says he's busy, he recalls Holo wanting to explore the town with him earlier, so Amadi asks if he could show her instead, which Lawrence accepts as Amadi heads to the inn. And then, Bados approaches Lawrence, who's heard he's looking for the chronicler, so he takes him to the chronicler's place, though there Lawrence sees it's a shelter for alchemists chased by the church, and inside, they reach the chronicler's home, who is a woman named Diane Rubens or Diana. Inside, the place is littered with feathers and finds out Diana's in charge of the alchemist's business trading, though she hates talking business. But Lawrence is just there for old stories from the north of Yoitsu, which Diana recognizes as the town that was destroyed by a bear that hunts the moon. Then gets a book reading about the moon-hunting bear named Erowa Wilmedhend. But Lawrence just wants to know Yoitsu's location, which, after thinking, Diana manages to remember, saying it's close to a town named Linos, which Lawrence has heard of as Diana tells a tale from there, where, long ago, a lone wolf appeared in the village named Holo of Yoitsu, who came from the deep mountain forests, who loved wine, and would sometimes transform into a young girl to dance with others, sporting a tail, and promised good harvest before moving south, and the harvest to grow rich, so she was named Wheat-tail Holo. Lawrence thanks her, but Diana wants something in return, a tale unaltered by the church, so he begins talking the tale of a wolf worshipped in a village filled with wheat. And at noon, they leave at last, and later, Lawrence goes to Mark again, saying he's now targeting Linos instead of Neohira. But Mark asks if he fought with his companion, having seen her with someone else outside, but Lawrence says it's Amadi, explaining what happened. But Mark warns him of Amadi, saying he's a skilled man for his age. As later, Lawrence returns to the inn, and finds Holo dead tired, but with a new scarf. As Lawrence helps her get to bed, and she instantly falls asleep, though she drops an odd-looking cue. The next day, she explains Amadi gifted her a high-quality fur scarf, while Lawrence asks if Amadi asked about their relationship, wanting their stories to match, so she explains she said she was a nun, saved by Lawrence from bad people, so she now owes him a huge debt. Though Lawrence then asks about the cue, as she explains it's something a fortune teller was using, saying it could see through fate, and is sure it can be sold expensively. But Lawrence knows what it is, a mineral named pyrite that chips in that shape when mined, which isn't worth much. But Holo says many people sought it, as Amadi bought it from an action, to Lawrence's surprise, figuring the fortune teller's taking advantage of the festival atmosphere. But then Lance suddenly knocks on their door, though he blushes seeing Holo, but he has a message for Lawrence. As he then worriedly rushes outside, Lawrence rushes to a bar, where Amadi's waiting for him, claiming he'll buy Holo's debt, gain her freedom, and then he'll confess his feelings and ask her hand in marriage. But Lawrence tells him Holo might not stop traveling with him even if her debt's paid, but Amadi will take the risk. Lawrence chooses to read the contract, where he's offering 1,000 trenis in full at once tomorrow, so Lawrence accepts. Afterwards outside, he's approached by Beto's, who saw what happened, but he tells Lawrence he believes Amadi will get the funds, though won't say how, not wanting to side with either of them. Later, Lawrence tells Holo of the deal, saying it's merely for profit, which Holo understands, and afterwards, she wants him to take her to the festival, which starts today. So he complies, but first meet with Mark, as Lant also arrives, but gets nervous seeing Holo again. But he's investigated Amadi's fundings, and found out Amadi has 800 trenis of assets right now, as Lawrence figures he won't get enough. But wondering if Amadi has an eye of him as well, Mark says Amadi finds tactics like these dirty. Afterwards, the festival's begun, so Holo and Lawrence go see it. But as there's a crowd, Lawrence brings Holo to their inn, with a perfect view of it, watching the many festivities and villagers dancing, as Holo then also dances with Lawrence, enjoying the festival. Though later, at noon, Holo's exhausted, so Lawrence gets her to bed. Though, he then receives a letter and a message to see Mark as soon as possible, and sees the letters from Diana, which Holo smelled, having picked the scent of a woman looking mad at it. But Lawrence explains it's from the chronicler he went to see, who told a tale of Holo and Linos, and thanks to her, he's pinpointed Yoitsu southwest of Neohira and east of Linos. But Holo gets sad hearing that, so Lawrence says it'll surely take them half a year to reach it, which cheers Holo up. Lawrence then tries going to Mark, but Holo's still mad at him having a letter, so he chooses to leave it there. Afterwards, he meets with Mark, who's found out Amadi's trading method, pyrite. bringing out a bag of it as Lawrence says one is worth about 1 illid, but Mark says it's now worth 270 to Lawrence's shock. Though Lawrence is dismayed having missed an opportunity like this as Mark explains he was busy, dancing with Holo instead, but says it's not late as the price will keep rising. So Lawrence buys his purite with the nails credit. Though Mark warns him Amadi will surely have the 1,000 trenny tomorrow with the pyrite, but Lawrence isn't worried, explaining Holo's traveling with a destination in mind already, so he'll rise their traveling funds with Amadi's money and the sold pyrite. Afterwards, Lawrence returns to the inn, but finds Holo beside the window, who has read the letter, having lied that she can't read, and distraught, asks what to do because she found out Yoitsu's destroyed. But Lawrence claims it must be a false legend, but she asks why did he hide this from her, so he explains he wanted to find the right time to tell her. But Holo claims he must have found it amusing, seeing her grow excited while oblivious from the truth, and figures out he's known from long ago, figuring he wanted her to be his weak lamb, and now wonders if he asked her to go to Yoitsu for Miyohira alone because he grew tired of her, saying she's now alone again. Lawrence tries consoling her, but she won't have it, asking what is she to him, and breaks down, wishing to not be alone again, asking Lawrence to make love to her so she won't be alone with the child, but Lawrence begs her to stop as she laughs, remembering he's good-natured. But that, it doesn't matter, remembering that there's someone who loves her, Amadi, as she apologizes and moves away, while Lawrence reads the letter and ends up shocked. As he then leaves the inn, distraught at it, Lawrence walks outside, remembering Holo's breakdown, and then meets with Mark, saying there was an unforeseen accident with Holo though. Mark claims he let his guard down, which he recognizes, but he wants information on the pyrite, as Mark says it's still going strong. But Lawrence now plans on crashing its market, so Amadi won't get the 1,000 trennis, though he doesn't know how. And returning to the inn, he ponders on how, but then he sees Amadi, who is visiting Holo to his shock. But Holo just stares at Lawrence, and he only looks away. But he then heads into the inn, but the innkeeper has letters for him, both from Holo. One, where she details Amadi's assets, surprising Lawrence, but the other is a marriage contract from Amadi, which she signed. So Lawrence then suddenly demands the innkeeper for all the money he's left him, and information of which bars Amanti frequents. As then, Lawrence travels from bar to bar, trying to find him, and eventually does alone in one, but he claims he's just there for business, proposing him to buy his pyrite, but Amadi figures he knows he's reselling pyrite and asks what's his intention. So Lawrence explains he wants to sell the pyrite to him on credit for 500 trenny in today's market price and he'd get the pyrite tomorrow evening. But Amadi catches on and figures Lawrence hopes the pyrite drops in value tomorrow, which Lawrence affirms, saying it's a gamble. But Amadi refuses, saying Lawrence would be too much at a disadvantage, not wanting to profit from his loss. But Lawrence says Amadi's risk is higher because Holo could break the marriage contract up. But as Amadi says he heard they fought, Lawrence now tries triggering him by saying Holo's cried to him already and that she's cute when she's like that. Which worked, as Amadi, shocked, now accepts, not worrying of taking everything from him now if this is how he chooses to speak. And later, Lawrence drinks with Mark, talking about his deal with Amadi. But then he asks Mark to buy tons of pyrite for him, as he didn't have the time to find a buyer and wants to use Mark's connections for it, and he'd instantly be paid. But Mark can't help him, because as a town merchant, he'd risk his reputation as they think he's an idiot who's fallen into money-making gambling and would affect his business and family. Lawrence is disappointed but understands, so he'll try approaching Bados now for help. But Mark figures he plans on using Diana, but Lawrence doesn't know what he means. As Mark explains, she controls the alchemist district's trading, and alchemists are never approached for trade, and they have pyrite. Lawrence is shocked at this and decides he'll use that plan, and Mark tells him to come back later as he'll maybe know of places that'll want to sell pyrite by then, as Lawrence then rushes out. In a bar, Lawrence finds Bados and asks for help in approaching Diana to buy the alchemist's pyrite via her. But Bados, figuring Lawrence found out Amadi's business, reminds him he wouldn't help either side. But Lawrence explains it's true this is for his own profit, but not monetarily, but rather he's realized he has something extremely important to him and can't lose it. Bados ponders on this, and after a bit, tells Lawrence that's what he wanted to hear and accepts helping him, telling him to tell Diana, "I've come to buy a box to store white feathers." So then, Lawrence goes to Diana's house and says Bados' password. So Diana lets him in, but mentions it's rare for her to have several visitors the same day, which makes Lawrence think Amadi's been here. As then, Lawrence asks to buy pyrite, But Diana, knowing Bados gave him the password but also knowing he wouldn't do it just for profit, asks Lawrence what's it for. So he explains he's realized he can't lose something important to him. Diana, taking a final look, accepts to sell to him. But there's one issue. Someone already reserved the pyrite, but they haven't paid yet, so she'd agree to sell it to Lawrence, but would have to convince the other party first, who've paid 16,000 illid for the pyrite. But Lawrence realizes that's 420 trennis, less than what he'll have, so he accepts, agreeing to meet with her representative tomorrow at the market when it opens. Afterwards, Lawrence is about to leave, but asks Diana a question first. If there are any stories of pagan gods and humans becoming a couple, and Diana responds that there are many while looking inside, so Lawrence hopes she'll tell them to him next time as he leaves. Though, hears Diana say good luck as she closes the door, which dazes him. Afterwards, Lawrence meets with Mark and explains what happened with Diana's pyrite. But Mark had Lant gather information and found out there's 370 trennis worth of pyrite in the market right now, to Lawrence's surprise, sending Lant to get it. Though Mark then says that, like him, he must have been affected by the curse of traveling merchants, only focusing on making money, but that, thanks to Holo, he's found something more precious than that, so his curse is lifting. And Lawrence now feels he can now answer Holo's "what am I to you" question. Mark then invites him to sleep in his house, but Lawrence chooses to sleep here, in a sack of wheat, because, while thinking on when he first found Holo, says he wants to get some experience. So the next day he wakes up, having slept in a sack, and afterwards, he's at the market and sees the average price of pyrite is 800 illid now. Meanwhile, Mark tells Lant that the gist of Lawrence's plan is find the perfect timing to sell a bulk of pyrite, which would make the price suddenly drop, making everyone panic sell and cause a market crash, which would make Amadi not make money. But for that to happen, Amadi mustn't sell his pyrite first. So Lawrence needs patience and resolve to find the perfect timing. While at the market, the price keeps rising, but Lawrence spots Amadi there, with Holo, to his shock. And Amadi approaches him, handing him the 500 trenni and Rimmer gold coins to his surprise, as Lawrence hands him the contract for the pyrite, which he'll give later. Mark tells Lant Lawrence must be patient because he'll a huge amount of pyrite to cause an effective market crash, as if he sells a small amount out of desperation, he'd be messing up. While Lawrence notices Holo's away from Amadi, who's accommodating her feathers though, leaves as she notices Lawrence, while the pyrite's price keeps rising, while Lawrence still awaits for Diana's representative, but is nervous, thinking Holo might have shared her trading tricks with Amadi, but wonders if Amadi was Diana's other party, and the pyrite keeps getting more expensive. Though Lawrence sees Amadi's looking for Holo, who hasn't returned, but then Lant approaches Lawrence, saying someone's approached them to buy wheat with 250 trennis worth of pyrite, so Lawrence hands him the coins and instructs him to come back quickly. Though, then awaiting for him, the pyrite then reaches exorbitant prices and he gets nervous, so he ends up selling his current pyrite, making the price drop. Though it's not enough to cause a crash, but figures that if Diana's pyrite arrives now, he'll definitely be able to crash the market. Though, Lant then returns with the pyrite. But deciding to wait for Diana's pyrite, Lant wonders if he'll actually arrive, which makes Lawrence realize he just gave up on that, so he rushes to sell again. But a big buyer's appeared, which made the price rise by a lot again. Lawrence, shocked, decides all he can do is wait for Diana's pyrite now. Though then, Lant signals that Amadi's with Holo now, who appears to be advised by Holo about to sell his pyrite, so Lawrence out of time can just wait for Diana's representative, who has finally arrived, but with a message instead because Diana failed to convince the other party, to Lawrence's shock. And distraught, figures it's all over and just gives Lant his pay. But Lant yells at him instead that a merchant should never give up easily, telling Lawrence that he fell in love with Holo at first sight, but that Mark said Lawrence would beat him up if he said it. As Lawrence says, someone's indeed in for a beating, but rather because he wants to beat himself up, because he forgot that merchants always plan for their business, which can be full of hypotheses. But for that, one always needs a trustworthy guidepost they should put their faith in, no matter how crazy something seems. As he look at Holo, who's accommodating her feathers again, so Lawrence now goes to sell his pyrite, but someone else is selling an amount way bigger than his right then. Holo, who punches Lawrence, but he holds her hand as she rests on him, and both their pyrite sold at the same time causes a market crash, which leaves Amadi defeated. Afterwards, Lawrence delivered Amadi the promised pyrite, which wasn't worth much now, But though Amadi didn't lose too much financially, it was a huge psychological blow to him. As later in the inn, Holo tells Lawrence she was planning on break things with Amadi in a much harsher manner, as she won't forgive his words, though won't say what they were, but tells Lawrence everything's not resolved yet. So he apologizes, as his contract with Amadi was a complete ego trip, and he didn't completely trust her because when she was first accommodating her feathers, it was a signal that she was the one who bought Diana's pyrite and disappeared for a bit to get it from Diana's representative. Though he thought she fully sided Amadi when he appeared to be about to sell, which pisses Holo off, as Lawrence figures she was tricking him instead and was instead signaling that Amadi had enough stock, so he'd hurry and sell, and that the marriage contract was to make him upset, so he'd take action, and remembers that she said they'd argue to solve problems faster, and figures that happened last night. And when she said she was sorry, he thought she was rejecting him, but instead she actually meant it. But Holo's angry at him because she was on the second floor the entire time last night, so she expected him to talk to her after seeing the contract, so he wasted time. On top of thinking she'd sided with Amadi, making her wonder if the bond they formed was actually nothing. But Lawrence holds her hand and says he wants to continue traveling with her, saying that he spent his entire life doing business, so he's stupid when it comes to everything else. But he wants to travel with her regardless. So Holo asks, what is she to him? And Lawrence replies with, no words can fully describe it, though Holo finds that line corny and bites his hand. Though, Lawrence now asks how she convinced Diana to sell her the pyrite, and Holo explains she figured Lawrence's plan from what Amadi told her. Though she visited Diana for a different reason, having tracked her location from a letter sent, she visited and told her to invent a story that Yoitsu may still exist and tell it to Lawrence. But stubborn, Holo explained the situation and almost convinced her, only for Lawrence to suddenly appear at that moment. So Diana knew what was up, and Holo was hiding upstairs at that moment and heard his question of pagan gods and humans being couples, which makes Lawrence blush. Though she says Diana's not a human, but rather a bird, as the feathers in her house are from hers. But as Holo hugs Lawrence, she claims she wants to return to Yoitsu, even if it's not there anymore. As they watch the festival finishing and decide to join it, Lawrence and Holo continue their journey, attempting to find an abbot, Luidlana Stinghilt, said by Diana to have stories of pagan gods in Deendran Abbey, but the abbey's location is unknown, except by one person, Father Franz, a church priest in the village of Terrio, but they need directions for Terrio first. So they first go to the town of Enberg, which is controlled by the church, for the directions and also so Lawrence can sell his flour, which he bought from Mark before leaving Kemerson. So they go to a wheat shop, but the owner, Riendut, can't buy it as they got enough already. So Lawrence just asks for Terrio's directions instead, saying they're heading to their church and is told is a day away in a straight road. Though Riendut's left looking oddly at them. So they keep advancing to Terrio, and the next day in the morning, Lawrence notices a strange cave in the mountains near a watermill. Though someone hastily rushes out of it and approaches Lawrence, saying he's a miller. Though Lawrence asks where's Terrio and is told is right ahead, but the miller then points out Holo as Lawrence says she's a nun. But at this, they're told that might be troublesome because right now there's a fight between Terrio and Enberg's church. Holo just dressed differently instead, which won't bring trouble, but the miller asks what's their business and is told they're just seeking directions, which disappoints him, hoping they had business he could have helped with. But Lawrence, seeing this, decides to introduce himself, as the miller excitedly introduces himself as Gyomeven. Lawrence and Holo then continue to Terrio, while Lawrence explains that millers' jobs are ungrateful as they collect the taxes of whoever grinds their wheat there, ending up hated for it, on top of being suspect of stealing flour. So he must have been hoping to find a business, which would allow him to leave the village. Afterwards, they enter Terrio with Holo hiding her cape, though everyone's staring at them. Then, they arrive at the church and are met by a woman, a priest named Elsa Stingheim, currently responsible of the church. Surprised, Lawrence explains he's looking for Deendran Abbey's directions to find Luidlana Stinghilt, but Elsa angrily claims she doesn't know and tries shutting the door, but Lawrence gets his foot in the way and asks for Father Franz, but is told he passed away last summer and has him move away, closing the door. Holo figures she's not lying about Father Franz's death, though she's lying about the abbey. Afterwards, they get a room in an inn and Holo rests, while Lawrence goes meet the head of the village, an elder named Sem. Though Lawrence first gets surprised seeing a stuffed snake in the table. He then gifts Sem a bag of his flour as his regards, and then asks if he knows of Deendran Abbey, saying the church claimed not to know. Though at this, Sem assures not to know as well, But asking about Father Franz, Sem explains he passed away, a huge loss, while Elsa's now replacing him. But then someone interrupts them, so Lawrence takes his leave, but is left pondering. And afterwards, returns to the inn and sleeps, though later he wakes up and finds Holo awake as well, in the middle of the night. But looking outside, they suddenly spot Evan running to the church, who hugs Elsa. Holo grins, though Lawrence just shuts the windows, saying they shouldn't peek, but Holo claims it's just studying, to see how she and Lawrence look in the eyes of others, which makes Lawrence drops his drink, as Holo figures that's how others see them, but that they don't pale in comparison to Evan and Elsa. But as she tries asking Lawrence if she's right, he just nervously tries ignoring her, though she then just claims she's hungry. So Lawrence says to go eat and gather information as well, because he figures both Elsa and Sem know about the Abbey and will look for why they're hiding it. Lawrence and Holo joyfully drink with the villagers at a tavern, alongside the owner, Amarao. Though then, Lawrence says this village must be blessed by God, but everyone suddenly becomes quiet as he realizes what he just said and apologizes, but he's told it's fine because despite the village owing Father Franz a lot, they still follow Lord Trujillo, a snake god of harvest that protects the village, said to hibernate in a cave he dug outside the village in the winter, though legend says everyone who enters that cave will be cursed, which Lawrence recognizes as the cave by the watermill. Though they then mention Enbirch and say Trujillo was also revered there, but the church ended up controlling it and tried to convert Terrio to, though they initially agreed to just build a church, but then wanted punitive taxes to turn a blind eye on Trujillo. And then, around 40 years ago, Father Franz showed up, as they now mention Elsa, saying that Father Franz picked her up over 10 years ago. Though then, seeing Holo asleep, Lawrence decides to take her to the inn. And afterwards in the day, Lawrence wakes up, though he notices no stores are open yet, wondering how this village makes money with Enbirch's taxes. At this, Holo calls the village miraculous, but Lawrence finds it ironic. Though Holo doesn't get why, so he explains a miracle, according to the church, is when God creates an event beyond human capability, like instantly curing the sick or turning water into wine. And it's the church's job to judge whether something was a miracle or a trick of the devil. But Holo says she's performed stuff like that before to humans for fun. Though then, he spots Evan leaving the church and Elsa happily waving him away, so he decides to go meet with him. As later, he approaches him at the watermill, asking to turn a bag of his wheat into flour. Though inside, Lawrence mentions he might want to do wheat business with Terrio, but Evan says to forget about it because all their grains are sold to Enbirch, saying that they're equals with Enbirch as they buy Terrio's grains and Terrio buys everything else from them on top of not having to pay taxes for alcohol and clothes. Lawrence is surprised at that deal because it actually favors Terrio over Enbirch, but as he asks about the punitive taxes, Evan says that's long gone, though doesn't know why, but that it's because of Father Franz. Afterwards, the flour's ready though. Lawrence mentions having seen him and Elsa quite close, as Evan explains she let him sleep in the church during the winters and eventually got close. As Lawrence mentions she was impatient when visiting her yesterday and even explains she's timid, though finds it weird she didn't mention they passed by, but Lawrence figures she didn't want to talk about another man. But then, as Lawrence is leaving, Evan asks him if it's hard to be a traveling merchant. So Lawrence answers that no job is easy in this world, but that he's enjoying it right now. Afterwards, Lawrence returns to the inn, but he tells Holo they maybe should give up finding the Abbey, because he guesses that Dandrian Abbey's actually the village's church and Louislana Stinghilt is Father Franz, meaning that Elsa and Sem knew he was collecting stories about pagan gods and pretended not to know. And knowing Terrio respects Father Franz because of the contract he made with Enbirch, he figures Terrio's hate against the church is because Enbirch's now trying to end that contract after Father Franz's death, and then have the village labeled as pagan to then attack it. So they might end up getting caught in this mess and end up labeled as heretics, making the situation dangerous. Holo says it's fine, but that she still wishes to hear more about Yoitsu but won't push Lawrence for it. Though she has an idea. At night, Lawrence and Holo approach Elsa at the church again, but explain they gave up trying to find the Abbey, so they just want to pray for their safe travels. So she takes them inside, but Lawrence now claims he wants to confess, saying that he tricked someone today in order to know something. Saying that he tricked Elsa, shocking her. As he explains, he's there to confirm this is Dandrian Abbey and that Father Franz is Louislana Stinghilt, saying he wants to know of his pagan god stories and knows she's worried of Enbirch finding those stories out. Elsa's unbelievably shocked and asks who are they. So Holo takes off her cape and reveals her wolf ears, but all this makes Elsa pass out. Afterwards, they've taken her to her room, though Elsa then wakes up but angrily calls Holo a demon, angering her, but Lawrence says they'll disappear after reading Father Fran's records. But asking why, Holo says she wants to return home to her friends, though she's not sure it still exists. So Elsa claims she follows God, but that she also wants to follow Father Fran's footsteps, believing Holo's not possessed, as Father Fran said no such thing existed. So she decides to help, and leads them to a hidden place behind the prayer room with a hidden entrance below a statue. Father Fran's hidden basement, saying they'll find his books there. Holo heads down while Lawrence thanks and apologizes to Elsa, but she claims Father Fran's would have been happy, having always claimed his collected stories weren't just fairy tales. Afterwards, they've gotten the books, and Holo reads them in the church, while Lawrence visits Elsa in her room. Though, as she claims she still has suspicions, she says she has a much bigger problem. So Lawrence offers in advising her, which she accepts and asks, if Father Fran's stories are true, does that mean God is fake? Saying that Father Franz was accused of heresy for his stories, but was a commendable priest regardless. But Lawrence claims he doesn't know the truth, but that he doesn't think Father Franz was wrong. But as Elsa asks why does he believe that, someone knocks on the church's door and figures it's Sem, who'll talk to her about Lawrence, but she won't say what they're truly doing here. Afterwards, Lawrence returns to Holo, but tells her their problem's now time, having to read the books quick, otherwise the upcoming snow will slow them down. Though then, Holo rests on his shoulder and reminds him she's tired of being alone, signaling him to put his arm around her, so he complies. But then he hears Elsa returning, so he tries moving, but Holo holds him in place. And Elsa sees this, so she just leaves, to Lawrence's dismay as Holo laughs. Later, Holo hears Evans arrived as they take a break. Though, talking about Elsa's conundrum, Holo asks what Lawrence was going to answer to Elsa, so he explains he believes Father Franz collected those stories to prove the existence of God, having wanted to feel his existence. Afterwards, they eat lunch with Elsa and Evan, and later, while leaving, Lawrence tries giving Elsa his answer, but she now tells him she'll consider it on her own. Though, Lawrence is left seeing how Elsa and Evan get along while cleaning up. So later, he mentions how they get along to Holo, but she looks shocked and she's embarrassed because he's envious of them. But Lawrence claims he's indeed jealous, but not of their relationship, but rather because they keep living here, wondering what about themselves. Since she's trying to reach her home and Lawrence is helping her, but he's traveling merchant without roots, asking what Holo will do once she returns to Yoitsu, but she doesn't know. But as Lawrence tries forgetting about the topic, Holo suddenly claims she's Wise Wolf Holo of Yoitsu repeatedly, and then rests on his lap to take a nap, telling Lawrence to read the books for her, while biting his finger, which he accepts. But later, Lawrence has found a book about the bear god, which Father Franz has found intriguing. But then, a horse gallops outside, waking Holo up. So Lawrence hands her the book as he goes investigate, finding out it might be from Enbirch, so they hide Father Franz's stuff, while Holo hides the book under the altar and rests on the church's floor as Holo's a nun. Though then, a mob enters the church, trying to capture them, but Lawrence says he's part of the Rowan Association, stopping them. So Sem explains someone in Enbert has died, eating wheat from their village. Outside the church, Sem says Enbert plans on returning all the wheat, so they'll have to return the money which they've already used on top of throwing out all their stored wheat. The villagers blame Lawrence and Evan, claiming they conspired to poison the water wheel with his wheat. But Sem calms them down, because the bigger issue is that Enbert might use this as an excuse to break Father Fran's contract, which makes the villagers pissed at Elsa, claiming she's useless. But Sem instructs the villagers to disperse, and they comply, and then instructs Ima to protect Elsa in the church while he claims he's suspicious of Lawrence, but still gives him the benefit of the doubt and has them go to his home. There, all waiting for Sam, Lawrence, and Holo, figure Enbert orchestrated all this, figuring that Rinda, knowing why they were going, sold them out, and are now being scapegoated to then have Terrio hand them over as a bargaining chip to delay paying for the returned wheat. Though they figure they could quickly flee to another town with Holo's wolf form and take shelter in the Rowan Association, which would deny the accusations and drive the church away. But they blame Evan instead, which would prejudicate Elsa, so Holo says she can carry them as well. Afterwards, Sem arrives and asks what's their business with Deendran Abbey, as Lawrence explains someone from Cumerson told him about it and came to search it for themselves, not for Enbirch nor the church. So Sem, asking if this is truly the case, asks Lawrence to lend some wisdom and money in exchange for his safety, which Lawrence reluctantly agrees to, but wants appropriate compensation if he turns this around, which Sem accepts. So Lawrence reveals Enbirch is behind this ordeal, figuring their plan is to buy Terrio's next year harvest with credit for a cheaper price, and they fall in a cycle, which hurt Terrio and that way end the contract with Father Franz. But asking if they're sure no poisoned wheat was mixed in, Sem claims it's easy to spot, being black and sticky, so there's no chance. Though he mentions Elsa also suspected Enbirch, so Lawrence decides to talk to her. As he and Holo are then escorted to Elsa's home, and she has them enter while Evan waits outside. Lawrence then tells Elsa they plan on escaping but don't want others to be blamed, so they offer taking Evan and her away too, and they only need the book Holo hid under the altar. Though Elsa hears Evan's outside listening, so she has him go get the book. He brings it, and Holo hastily takes it and rushes away as Lawrence follows her to the hidden church spot, but she wants to read it alone. So Lawrence returns to Elsa's place, though sees her and Even holding hands, desperate. As Elsa explains the town will be 70 Rimmer gold coins short to repay Enbirch, and is distraught and faints. As later, Emma takes care of her and Evan talks with Lawrence about escaping. Emma overhears and says she hopes they escape, while Evan goes to try and convince Elsa. Afterwards, Lawrence meets with Holo, who's finished reading the book, which Lawrence now reads. Though it's just a short tale, which reads that the gods of the land all fled in terror as Yoitsu was destroyed by the bear's claws. Though it means Holo's friends escaped, which satisfies her enough. So then Lawrence decides they'll escape, though they'll have to leave his goods, cart, and horse behind. But then, the villagers angrily knock on the door, so Ida instructs them all to hide, while she'll keep the mob at bay and tries to convince Elsa and Evan to flee, which they accept in the end. So, Holo reveals her ears to Aida and Evan's shock, though they'll keep the secret, and says in her wolf form she could easily jump over the crowd, but doesn't think they'd handle it. But at this, Elsa remembers Father Franz said there's an underground passage in the basement, so they head down there, as Lawrence breaks down a wall and finds the passage. They make their way through the passage and eventually reach the exit, which is the cave by the watermill, Trio's hibernating hole where the villagers come to pray, which Lawrence finds clever it connects to the church, as the villagers would never dare enter it. They then keep going, and at a forest, Holo instructs Evan and Elsa to turn around, while Lawrence takes her clothes and she eats the wheat, taking on her wolf form. Though Evan and Elsa appear afraid, but they regardless hop on Holo's back, and with Lawrence, Holo begins their escape, running incredibly fast, while Evan and Elsa try holding on. Afterwards, they're far away enough, so Holo decides they'll rest, as Evan and Elsa appear agitated. So later they rest on her, though Holo senses something, and Lawrence goes see, followed by Evan seeing a caravan of wheat carts from Enbirch going to return it all to Terrio. Though, Evan asks Lawrence if she could have Holo kill them all. Lawrence explains she'd succeed, but Enbirch would send an army to Terrio instead. But then, they spot a carriage of a bishop, figuring they'll also label the village as pagan. Afterwards, Lawrence says to continue a bit further and get breakfast, so they continue their way. Though Elsa suddenly stops, and asks Holo if she's truly a god. But she explains she's wise wolf Holo of Yoitsu, who lives within the wheat and can transform into a human and wolf, worshipped by humans as a god of harvests, who she responds to their prayers. But hearing this, Elsa asks if she's Trullo, but Holo claims she knows the answer to that already. As Elsa claims, Trullo is Trullo and Holo. But wanting to ask something else, Holo says that questions shouldn't be asked to her, as Elsa cries, but then claims she'll carry on Father Fran's legacy, being certain of it now, so she decides she'll return to the village. Evan tries objecting, but Elsa is decided, saying she can't abandon the villagers, and tells Evan she hopes he becomes a fine merchant as she heads back. But as Evan asks Lawrence what to do, he says she wants him to become a fine merchant, so he must be able to weigh the gains and losses, saying that Elsa's not without worry. So Evan has decided he'll be with Elsa and chases after her. Though then, Holo stomps Lawrence, infuriated, asking if she was wrong. But Lawrence says to fight for your hometown, even against hopeless odds, at the very least will leave one with no regrets, while caressing her. But Holo just stomps harder and takes her human form, angry, claiming no creature could beat her in Yoitsu, and wants to know if she could have beaten the moon-hunting bear. But Lawrence says he doesn't think so, but that if she fought to the death, he's sure it'd have filled at least 3 pages of the book. But Lawrence says the bear attacked with no way of her knowing, so there's nothing she could have done, which she knows, and then gets off Lawrence. But she now wants to help Terrio, saying she can detect which wheat's poisoned, but it wouldn't help as they wouldn't believe them. As Lawrence says, they need a miracle. But this makes him remember Holo said she performed miracles before, saying that in the past, the church has retracted claims of heresy as miracles, but it needs to be a big event. So, Holo then blows on her wheat and shows a miracle to Lawrence, which leaves him shocked, and decides that will be more than enough. But they'll need to convince Elsa to participate, and that even if they succeed, Enbirch won't buy back the wheat, so they'll have to turn it into money. But he plans on dealing with that. Holo then takes on her wolf form and eventually catch up to Evan and Elsa. And later, in Trio's cave entrance, Lawrence explains his plan, planning to demonstrate Holo's miracle when everyone's cornered by Enbirch. Elsa accepts, but she also has an idea which to place the pagan gods under their god, which Lawrence and Holo accept. And then, Enbirch has arrived. Lawrence, Holo, Evan, and Elsa return to the church as Evan gets a chalice and Lawrence and Holo watch things unfold outside as Holo hears Enbirch's bishop, Mendez, demanding money and spot Reendat's with them. Though then, they throw Trio's figure to the ground and demand Sem to light it on fire, otherwise the village will be declared pagan. Seeing this, they begin the plan and head outside. Everyone's shocked seeing them back, but Mendez, regardless, claims this village is under the protection of an evil pagan god, so the church will take over it. But Elsa claims it won't be necessary because she claims she's met one of God's divine messengers. The people are shocked, but Mendez claims that's heresy, demanding proof. So Holo and Evan go to a wheat cart while Elsa says the worship of Trio is indeed a mistake, angering the villagers, but explains that it's not completely off the mark because she believes that Trio is one of God's miracles. But as Mendez asks if it's not just devil's trickery, Elsa claims Trio promised a sign. As then, the wheat from all the carts matures incredibly fast, leaving everyone perplexed, including the church's men, claiming it's a miracle. So Elsa now asks Mendez to confirm it's not an act of the devil by blessing a chalice, and then Evan will prove God's righteousness with his own body. Mendez, pressurized, reluctantly accepts, blessing it with holy water, as Evan then mixes it with flour from every cart and consumes it unharmed. So now, Elsa wants Mendez to confirm the miracle by also consuming the flour, but Mendez gives in and claims it's indeed a true miracle, claiming that the village isn't pagan. Everyone's relief. Though then, Holo reminds Lawrence about the money issue, and he comes up with an idea. So Lawrence approaches Reendat as Elsa tells Sem that Lawrence will take over the negotiations, which Sem accepts and tells to Mendez as they head to the church, and Lawrence is left with Reendat, saying he'll negotiate in Terrio's name, asking what's the price for accepting the returned wheat. But as Reendat tries saying 200 Rimmer coins, the town's baker gets furious because that's the same price they bought it at. But Lawrence tells Reendat it must be bad if another miracle happens, implying he knows the story of poisoned wheat is fake. But Reendat, nervous, asks him to stop and ends up reducing the price to 140 Rimmer coins, which Lawrence and the villagers accept. But as Lawrence says the villagers still lack those funds, he proposes him to persuade Mendez to allow Terrio to sell wheat under his name, which Reendat accepts, but saying they'll pay once their business goes well, Reendat won't accept, which is why Lawrence is also offering to dissolve the contract created by Father Franz. The villagers are infuriated, but Lawrence explains Enbirch will keep hating them if that contract still stands, and says that if Mendez and Reendat accept, he has a wonderful business idea for the village, though he'll need the baker's help with eggs, butter, and honey. So time later, Lawrence's plan works, having had Terrio mass produce a southern pastry unknown in those parts. Biscuits, which are selling extremely well in Enbirch, and has fixed the relationship with them and will also turn into profit in the end. And while eating with Elsa and Evan, they find out Evan will lead the village's negotiations from now on, while Elsa says more people have stopped by the church lately, though Trio is still way more popular. And afterwards, Lawrence and Holo are about to depart, though Lawrence asks if Elsa's found her answer, and she says she believes Father Franz wanted to confirm pagan gods existed to confirm the existence of God, which makes her believe it isn't good for the church to refute Trio's existence. And then the villagers gather to say goodbye to Lawrence and Holo as they depart, saying goodbye to Elsa and Evan. Though as Elsa looks down, Lawrence yells that traveler don't leave behind regrets in a village, but good memories, as everyone waves them off. Afterwards, Lawrence claims they made profit in the end, while Holo claims she gained enough from the village, believing it was worth the effort. Though, Lawrence then says they'll head to Linos, the town with Holo's legend, but noticing Holo bother, he says he's heard of a good business deal, but that it's a bit out of the way, meaning their travel will be longer. So Holo, seeing no other way, figures she'll accompany him, as she rests on his arm. And we now see the woman with the child again, who's finishing telling the story of the wolf for today. Though then, the child hears someone arrive, so she rushes to greet him. While the woman claims the story's far from finished.